an ordinary way, just in your own language, tell that story, and then it'll be a permanent record of what you know about that thing that happened so long ago.
This is Culture Stories. I'm Alyssa, Yádi London, a Tlingit woman who is passionate about exploring the contemporary lives of Indigenous people in today's globalized world. Today, we want to recognize that we are on Dena'ina Ełnena Athabaskan land, and this is a culture story about the Indigenous Place Names Movement here in Anchorage, Alaska. The Indigenous Place Names Movement has been years in the making in an effort to create a city that honors the Indigenous place in order to reclaim the identity and heritage of the First Peoples of these lands. This ensures future generations grow up knowing who they are and where they come from. And in this episode, we attend a ceremony of the unveiling of the first place marker that reclaims the original place name of Chonsnu, which for many years prior had been called Westchester Lagoon and Chester Creek. This is a culture story about the Indigenous Place Names Movement of Alaska. We are on Dena'ina Ełnena Athabaskan land, and this is Dena'ina Ełnena. The Dena'ina are part of an Athabaskan ethnic group that have continuously inhabited this area since time immemorial. This is Erin Leggett, the Senior Curator of Alaska History and Indigenous Culture at the Anchorage Museum, and the chief of the native tribe of Eklutna.
This is our home. This is our village. If you're from rural Alaska or some other place, you have that rural characteristics. We didn't have that. And so, although we have all the modern conveniences, it was hard to imagine what this place looked like before the modern city.
What did it do to your identity growing up, not having the Indigenous place names recognized in the city that you were living in?
Well, it was deeply confusing for me. There was no talk of our people. There might be a passing message, oh, the Indians live out in Eklutna, go see the cemetery. But it wasn't presented as anything like a living, breathing culture. When I started at the Alaska Native Heritage Center when I was 19, I met for the first time, predominantly Indigenous people. Some had grown up in Anchorage, some had grown up in villages.
Nobody even knew who we were, not even, 10 years ago. When I would say that I'm Dena'ina, they're like, who's that? It's like, well, actually, where you're at is where we're traditionally from. And like, oh, there's actually natives here? Like, yes, there is, and yes, there was. And we've always been here. And
kind of the light bulb went off in my brain that if other Indigenous people didn't know that this was an Indigenous place, then how would the average person from Alaska or visitor?
That confusion eventually prompted Aaron to go on his own journey of self-discovery, which led him to a book called Shem Pete's Alaska.
I discovered this book when I was, 19, and for the first time, seeing all these place names and seeing the histories, it started to come alive.
Shem was an eyewitness to the founding of Anchorage in 1915. He was here at the very, very beginning. He traveled all over the Cook Inlet area and knew 650 Dena'ina Athabaskan place names.
Jim is one of the two authors that spent years working with Shem Pete and other Dena'ina elders to preserve and perpetuate their knowledge for years to come.
He would sit and tell us stories and give us names because he wanted them preserved. And he wanted people to learn from them. And then what he'd say at the end, quite a bit, is, who's going to tell you this when I'm gone? Nobody.
So today, down at Chonsnu meaning Grass Creek, we're at Westchester Lagoon, and we're about to unveil a sign as part of an Indigenous Place Names site marker project throughout the Anchorage Bowl.
The project aims to accurately and beautifully highlight the culture and history of the Anchorage area's Indigenous people through place markers like this one that are built to last.
Well, that place they call Chester? That's Chonsnu. And it was anglicized into Chester. So people might wonder, who the heck was Chester? Right. Well, there was no Chester. It's Chonsnu.
When you were starting this project, what was like the instigation of it? Like, what was the catalyst? What were the conversations that were happening?
We were developing a suite of wayfinding signs. I called up Aaron and said, don't you have a list of places that would be important for us to put up interpretive signs? Without that level of expertise, we wouldn't have anything to really be talking about here.
But we can also accept federal funding, and we can accept...
There was only one place in the entire city where the Dena'ina were even mentioned. And it said two things about the Dena'ina. One, that they hadn't been here very long before the Russians arrived, and that most of them had died. And the second one is partially true because there were a series of epidemics. But the first allegation that the Dena'ina really hadn't been here very long is totally false. And what shows that in part is the archaeology, but also the place names. That there are so many names with such detail and such knowledge.
And one of those names is what was celebrated today.
Today is really great in that it memorializes the Dena'ina name for Chester Creek. You are walking on Dena'ina land. Hey, hey, hey,
There was a lot of work and collaboration that even took place just to lead up to the celebration. And we're going to go talk to one of those key people.
Michael has been instrumental in organizing all the moving pieces to make this project possible. Her dedication to this work is because she is passionate about changing people's ideas of the history of this place.
As a Native person, like, why is having the places, the actual physical locations that you interact with in your city, why is that important to your identity?
My experiences as a child were feeling bad about my culture, feeling like I didn't fit into either the Native culture or the dominant culture. My mother is, she's of German descent. So my identity was really confusing as a child because it wasn't something that was honored to be Native. And I think that a lot of people on that committee felt that too in different ways. And now, today, it is something that we're honoring, and I think that has a large impact on sort of thinking about how can we extend this out into popular culture, not only, for Native people, but for everyone. This is a Dena'ina place name project, and I'm not Dena'ina, but I feel that, it translates to me. It's easy to understand how honoring one culture can help my identity and build my identity.
Can you tell me more about the stakeholder engagement and all the people you have to bring to the table in order to make something like a place names movement happen?
I think the real way to make something Indigenous is to have a lot of consultation and engagement with people that are bearers of that culture.
The Dena'ina, or what is now known as Anchorage, is a Native place. Dena'ina people have been caring for this place for thousands of years.
What was really special about this project is that it was done in collaboration. It's part of that collaboration, part of being like at the table making these decisions, with Dena'ina, with this place that I live, that I am from. This is Indigenous land, and this is part of who I am. So seeing myself represented, I think that it allows our community to see itself differently as a place that needs to be inclusive of everyone, that needs to recognize Indigenous history as truly the first history.
Melissa is an Alyssa artist and has been a big advocate for acknowledging the Indigenous place names throughout Anchorage and had the opportunity to design the Chance-New place marker.
We really wanted something that was going to represent thousands and thousands of years of Indigenous stewardship, as well as sort of highlight Indigenous languages and why that's so important here. The fire bag is what we decided upon to be our symbol. Fire bags were traditionally held by Indigenous leaders, what would be considered like wealthy individuals. And wealth in Indigenous culture, and Dena'ina culture specifically, is represented in your ability to care for someone. The fire bag just seemed to be the most appropriate symbol.
So what does this placemaking sign mean to you and the kids that you teach?
I'm trying to teach the kids about our ways, and it's really hard when there's not much media, not much representation, when we are that representation. And so to be able to point to something that has our language on it, gives them some type of reference.
While people may wonder who Mr. Chester was, in fact, there wasn't a man by that name. It was anglicized from the Dena'ina name of Chaunceynew. And now this grassy creek that runs throughout Anchorage is once again known by its original name. This was memorialized by a celebratory ceremony dedicated to the Dena'ina people who continue to live and thrive here.
So what do you hope that this project does for other Alaska Native people, for youth? What are some of the goals of this project?
Well, I think we were hoping for this project that it be replicated around the state and even around the country. As far as, modern cities go, Anchorage is one of the youngest. And so we're able to think about the fact that within, 3 generations, how much has changed, but also the Indigenous values, the respect for the land, and the ability to share our history is important, especially, I think, for young people who often struggle with their identity in this, modern world.
The effort behind the Indigenous Place Names Movement and the ceremony that took place today hopes to help future generations of Dena'ina people feel connected to their homelands and thus their heritage. Thank you for watching Culture Stories. I hope that you are inspired to contemplate your own identity and the connection to the place you're from and to those who came before you. Gunashish, thank you. I'm your host, Alyssa Yádi London, and this is Culture Stories.